Charles Dickens said, "Make them laugh, make them cry, make them wait." And while I'm certainly not Dickens, I'll do my best to apply his advice. You're listening to Productions with Purpose. This is the Laugh, Cry, Wait podcast. The protagonist. If you're listening to this podcast, this is a term you're probably already familiar with. But just in case you aren't, here's a short definition. The protagonist is the hero of the story, the character that the audience follows and roots for as the narrative progresses. Every story has a protagonist. This may or may not be human, but if there is nothing and no one for the audience to care about, to fear for the well-being of, and to identify with, there is no story. The protagonist is the central focus of the narrative. Yes, there are many other characters he's surrounded by, and yes, we may well enjoy their contributions to the story immensely, but they exist to further the protagonist's story. Today, I'll be looking at one way we could go about creating a protagonist from scratch. If you'd like to join me, perhaps we'll learn something together. I'm Caleb Slayball, and I've been writing and producing dramatized audio productions for the past 10 years. My goal here is to inspire the next generation of Christian writers to pursue excellence in storytelling. If you would like to support me, you can do that at productionswithpurpose.com. So let's get into it. What makes a good protagonist? The first and foremost thing is that he must be someone the audience can relate to, care about, and identify with in some way. Audience empathy for a protagonist is essential for a successful and effective story. As human beings, we rarely empathize with people we dislike, so in order to gain audience empathy, the protagonist must also be likable. Note that likable and morally upright are not the same thing. In fact, likable and kind are not the same thing. The protagonist must simply have some kind of drawl that appeals to the audience. This could be intelligence, charm, ingenuity, or any number of other attributes that serve to intrigue the audience and draw them in to see the world through the protagonist's eyes. The deeper the audience's empathy for the protagonist, the better the overall story will be. You absolutely must make your protagonist worthy of empathy in some way. In addition to being likable, the protagonist, as well as other influential characters, must be properly motivated. What does he want? The answer to this question defines the story goal. Why does he want it? The answer to this question is what drives the story. The audience engages with the story because they want to follow the protagonist as he pursues the story goal. They follow along with him because they want to see him achieve his goal. If the motivation for the protagonist to pursue this goal is lacking, the audience will be pulled out of the story. So if the story goal for Bob is to find his missing phone, but the motivation is that he needs it to order pizza because he doesn't want to cook, the audience might relate, but also probably doesn't care very much. However, if Bob needs to find his missing phone in order to make a call, and if he doesn't make this call by midnight, someone he loves will get hurt or something else will go catastrophically wrong, this is much more compelling, and the audience will likely stick around to see what happens. Character motivation is often tied closely to stakes. The higher the stakes, the more powerful the motivation. The more powerful the motivation, the more intrigue the audience experiences, and the more empathy they feel for the protagonist. We'll talk more about stakes later. Some of the most important features of a protagonist are the flaws in his character. The protagonist must be a real human. Perfection is reserved for God and the redeemed creation to come. So don't design a protagonist whose worst trait is that they're mildly upset at times. The flaws must run deep, especially from a Christian perspective. They must be so significant that the protagonist won't be able to reach the story goal without addressing them. Perhaps the major difference between a Christian telling and a secular telling is the source of these flaws, and therefore the method needed to address them. A secular story often presents the protagonist's flaw as a direct result of the environment and/or characters that he's surrounded by. How many times have you heard people are basically good? If people are basically good, the environment is one of the only things that can take the blame for any serious flaw in a character. If not the environment, then some mental or emotional impairment. The only real rule is that it cannot be inherent to who the person is at the core. On this understanding of the world, it is not surprising that the moral so often boils down to the power was inside you all along, and the goal is some version of overcoming the external conditions that are responsible for the internal flaws. This isn't to say that environment, people, and trauma have no effect. They obviously do have significant and deep effects. We live in a fallen world, and these things are constant reminders of that fact. It is simply to say that, from a Christian perspective, the spiritual element can't be left out and ignored. Sin is a universal human condition. The core of the problems we face spring not from the environment we find ourselves in, but from the proclivity to evil that we find within us. The flaws the protagonist must contend with are deeper seated than he can ever comprehend, and try as he might, he will never be able to vanquish them on his own strength. But from a Christian perspective, he doesn't have to. Nor does he have to seek some mystical power within himself, some divine spark that's supposed to make all right again. The secret to breaking free from the bondage of sin is no secret. It is humble surrender to Jesus Christ. To show this through story may be one of the most difficult problems the Christian writer faces. Weaving themes through the narrative while resisting the urge to preach at the audience often seems to be more difficult than it should. The flaws you give your protagonist must not be physical or mental. They must be moral. Weakness of body or mind may also afflict him, but the moral flaw is the primary issue that will undercut his ability to achieve the story goal and fulfill his desire. I have chronic fatigue and low-level chronic pain. Some mornings I do not have the energy to get up early. Other mornings I do not have the desire to get up early. The line between fatigue and laziness is a difficult one to distinguish at times. I can tell you with confidence, however, that laziness and lack of self-control have cost me more over the years than chronic fatigue ever has when it comes to reaching my goals. Fatigue is a physical issue. Laziness is a moral one. Confusing the two, or worse, blaming my moral flaws on my physical impairments, would be a death sentence to any hope of progress in my personal life. Understanding who your protagonist is, who he really is absolutely essential to crafting a well-told story. You want to know who he is, and what it is that he wants no one else to see or know, but all the same drives his deepest decisions and actions throughout the story. With this knowledge, then, your protagonist's true character can be revealed slowly as the story progresses. He is not going to be the same person he presented himself to be to the other characters and, by extension, the audience. His true character will influence him directly in the most important choices he has to make. Psalm 15 lists ideals that those who seek to live by God's standard should embody. We can use this list to build out the true character of our protagonist. They are as follows. 1. Walks blamelessly and does what is right, is morally upright. 2. Speaks the truth in his heart, is committed to truth and will speak truthfully to himself and others. 3. Does not slander. 4. Does no evil to his neighbor. 5. Does not take up reproach against his friend, doesn't maliciously malign others, doesn't bear false witness against others. 6. Vile people are despised in his eyes. Evil is seen as evil and abhorred. 7. Honors those who fear the Lord. Good is seen as such and is respected. 8. Swears to his own hurt and does not change. Integrity in word and deed to the point of pain and beyond. 9. Does not put out his money at interest. Within the context of Scripture, this refers to taking advantage of those who need help, charging interest on what should simply be a gift, and extortion of those who are less fortunate. 10. Does not take a bribe against the innocent. Cannot be bought or corrupted by money. So, to create the core character of your protagonist, select at least one of the traits listed here, and use it, or its opposite, to start creating your character. But enough talk. Let's put all of this into practice by creating a protagonist using one or more of the attributes listed in Psalm 15 as a core strength, and the opposite of another one as a serious moral flaw. We'll name this character Ben. For the positive trait, we'll select number 8 from the list. Swears to his own hurt and does not change. Integrity in word and deed to the point of pain and beyond. So Ben is a man of his word. If he makes a promise, he keeps his promise. This is a core piece of who he is. When push comes to shove, he'll hold up his end of the deal. This doesn't mean he's without flaws, though. For his negative trait, we'll select number 10 and take the opposite of it. Ben is not above taking a bribe, even if it hurts innocent people. Money is his weakness. What you quickly find when trying to create a protagonist is that he doesn't exist in a vacuum. Your protagonist inhabits a story world, and the story follows what the protagonist does in this world. You cannot develop a character without beginning to develop a plot. Robert McKee says about plot versus character, they are in essence the same. Plot is character, character is plot. The two are back-to-back sides of the same storied coin. So, with these two elements, Ben's true character of being a man of his word and his flaw of being swayed by money, we can start to build out a world for these traits to be played out in. Perhaps you're thinking, but wouldn't these two traits conflict? Yes, they likely will, but that's what makes a protagonist, and really any character, interesting and realistic. The better, God-given instincts of a man battling against the proclivity to evil found beside them within his very soul. As human beings, we bear the image of God. This is why generally bad people can do good things. As human beings, we are also subject to our fallen, sinful natures. This is why generally good people can do bad things. It would be wise, in order to maximize the potential of Ben's character, to place him in a story world and circumstances that pit his commitment to keeping his word directly against his love of money. This means that we're likely better off setting the story in a town, village, or city of some kind, rather than a prairie homestead, as we need a functioning economy to facilitate Ben's temptations. Also, having a larger community will allow us to showcase his commitment to keeping his word, and the denser concentration of people will allow for more intrigue and subplot weaving should we wish to go that route with the story. Now, quickly running through a characterization for Ben, we'll say he's a middle-aged man whose hair has begun to gray. He has a stoic resting face, but a brilliant smile, and his eyes glow with joy when he laughs. He's a clocksmith, traveling from town to town with his 13-year-old nephew, who he promised his dying sister he'd take care of until the boy was old enough to fend for himself. He always shines his shoes, but cares very little about the rest of his clothing, only replacing his shirts when they begin to fall apart, and using his trousers as an all-purpose hand-cleaning rag. We could go on, but you get the idea. Keep in mind that we could change every aspect of the characterization of Ben and still have a story, because what makes him interesting and provides the conflict that the story needs to function is not his gray hair nor his shined shoes and filthy trousers, but his moral flaw in contrast with his commitment to keeping his word. But how are we going to bring out this tension? A large part of what makes your protagonist compelling are the forces of antagonism that he's up against in the story. The antagonist plays a significant role in the shaping of your protagonist. Whether it's a force of nature or another character, the antagonist exists to exploit the weaknesses and flaws in your protagonist with unmatched skill. Earlier, I said the higher the stakes, the more powerful the motivation. We'll use the antagonist to create these stakes, and therefore motivate Ben throughout the story. The things that the antagonist can use against Ben are his love of money, his sense of duty to his nephew, and his compulsion to keep his word. Ideally, all three will be brought into play. Perhaps the antagonist is a client of Ben's who's an avid collector of clocks and watches. During a service call, Ben's nephew steals something but gets caught by the antagonist, who offers to overlook the offense in return for Ben's service as a false witness against an enemy or rival of his in court. To sweeten the deal, the antagonist also offers Ben a substantial sum of money for his troubles, enough to send his nephew to a prestigious boarding school. In this way, we pit Ben's better instincts against his moral flaws in a meaningful way with plausible motivation. To break this down into simple steps, what we've done to create a protagonist is as follows. 1. We identified the main element of Ben's true character. He's a man of his word, not necessarily a man of total integrity, as he's swayed by money. 2. We gave Ben a serious moral flaw, one that could destroy him if he doesn't overcome it by the end of the story. 3. We developed a characterization for Ben, which allowed us to build out the beginnings of a story world for him to inhabit. 4. We also developed an antagonist for Ben to come up against, so as to draw out Ben's real character and provide the necessary conflict for the story to function. With these 4 steps, we've created a protagonist, and with him, a very basic story idea. Obviously, this only scratches the surface of what would be needed to flesh this idea out and construct a full story. Every major character would have to be developed in much the same way as the protagonist, including the antagonist or villain. It is much easier to come up with a compelling idea than it is to finish a compelling manuscript. A likable but flawed protagonist with proper motivation will go a long way toward making that happen. That's all I've got for this episode. If you'd be so kind, like, subscribe, and share this with your friends. Pursue excellence in your craft, whatever it may be. And remember that whatever you do, you are called to do it to the glory of God. Until next time, here on the Laugh, Cry, Wait podcast. God bless.